Thank you, Mr. Acting Deputy President. As a servant to the people of Queensland and Australia, having just spent 3 days with several internationally renowned scientists establishing that no valid empirical evidence exists to support the claim of human-induced climate change, I now rise to speak to one of the massive costs to the taxpayer of widespread government belief in this myth. Seeing that taxpayer funds are spent wisely and not profligately and wantonly wasted in the pursuit of an ideologically driven left-wing agenda is one of the most important tasks of a crossbench senator. Ours is a house of review, and it is focused on ensuring accountability. As a servant to the people of Queensland and Australia, I started in this Senate with the aim of protecting freedom, in fact restoring freedom, by opening the debate about climate science. The debate, Mr. President, is now blown wide open. Last night, the international scientists who I've been hosting joined me in live Facebook broadcasting on restoring trust in Australian science. This live Facebook conversation reached 72,000 people, had over 20,000 views, 1,000 reactions and 1,000 comments. A chair was left vacant on the panel for the CSIRO's Chief Executive, Minister Hunt, Labor Environment Spokesman Mr Butler and Senator Larissa Waters. Unfortunately, these parliamentarians do not think that 20,000 people who tuned into our broadcast were worth the time to explain why they are implementing policies that are destroying our nation's wealth. Why, Mr Acting Deputy President, are the Facebook figures worth talking about? Because people want to engage in this topic. They want rigorous debate, they want accountability, and our live broadcast last night proved this. Australians are crying out for debate, for an ability to contact their members of parliament who must listen and have those members of parliament answer questions on issues such as the cost of climate change policies. After watching the issue of climate change explode on Twitter last night, I was pleased to see Dr. Karl Kruszenitsky accept my offer to debate the issue. I am looking forward very much to a public discussion at last, out in the open, with Dr. Karl on the great climate change scam. The public want openness in this debate. At last, we will start to have a debate. For example, the public have fair and legitimate questions about desalination plants constructed at exorbitant expense by Labor state governments in New South Wales, Victoria and Queensland. Based on the myth that the cyclical drought experienced by many Australian states a few years ago was somehow evidence that Australia's climate was becoming too arid to ever build more dams, Labor governments in 5 states poured billions of dollars into the construction of desalination plants. Australians were told the dams would never fill again. The CSIRO had glossy brochures featuring dried-up mudflats. Then, of course, in 2010, the drought broke, and it rained, and it rained, and it rained, and existing dams filled till they overflowed and desalinated water wasn't needed. These colossal white elephants have proven to be one of the most wasteful and useless expenditures of public money in this nation's history. In its 2011 inquiry into the urban water sector, the Productivity Commission found that $10.2 billion was spent by 5 states on constructing 6 desalination plants between 2006 and 2012. This included $1.2 billion wasted by the Queensland Labor government on the utterly useless South East Queensland Tugun desal plant completed in 2009. In addition to the initial construction costs, in their wisdom, Labor governments committed to paying ongoing operating costs for these desal plants, regardless of whether they were actually needed or even operating to produce any water, massively compounding the cost to taxpayers for decades into the future. Mr Acting Deputy President, in its 2013 report on water infrastructure, the Queensland Audit Office found that Queensland's White Elephant desal plant had a $935 million replacement cost and an $824 million written down value. And even though this plant was never used, it still incurs an annual 2011 to 2012 actual operating cost of $89 million, and forward estimates estimate $121 million per annum, paid for by taxpayers and families of Queensland. In Queensland, shortly after wasting $1.2 billion on construction due to unexpected high rainfall, the desal plant fell into disuse. Yet it's costing us $121 million a year to keep it. In Victoria, the plant, built in 2012 at a cost of $3.5 billion, was mothballed almost immediately. This is billions being flushed away. Despite no water being drawn from the Victorian facility and dams filling up to 80% of capacity, in 2014 costs to the Victorian taxpayer were found to be $2 billion and rising. What's a few billion here and there, I hear the Labor Party say, and their Greens mates. As a direct result, Mr Acting Deputy President, of the construction of the useless Victorian desal plant, water costs in Melbourne were driven up by as much as $200 a year. Even if no water was produced, the Victorian taxpayer is still liable to pay contracted operating costs, with a so-called holding charge of $600 million required to be paid every year for no benefit. Costs to the taxpayer are projected to cumulatively rise to as much as $18 billion by 2039 to 2040. Now, however, with the election of the extreme left-wing Andrews government, some effort has been made to pretend that Labor's desalination liability is of some use with an unnecessary order for a small volume of water in the current financial year. In New South Wales, the government cunningly sold its plant to a consortium including the Ontario Teachers' Pension Plan for $2.3 billion, but on a 50-year lease that guaranteed them a generous annual income, even if no water is produced. The New South Wales taxpayer probably would have got a better value if the government had simply blown up the New South Wales desal plant and agreed to give the Ontario Teachers' Pension Fund half of what they are now receiving for nothing. In fact, speaking of blowing things up, the South Australian government deliberately detonated a coal-fired power plant. And Senator Back was correct in now talking about the energy security that is being destroyed. The Taliban is at work in the government of South Australia. What is most astonishing with the white elephant desalination plants—
Senator Roberts, could you resume your seat? Point of order, Senator.
Mr Acting Deputy President, when a senator refers to the Taliban, who treat women as second-class citizens, public hangings in their squares, that is absolutely disgusting, Mr Acting Deputy President. I'd ask you to call the senator to withdraw.
It's a debating point, Senator Still. No point of order. Senator Roberts.
Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President. What is most astonishing with the white elephant desalination plants now stampeding in a herd is that after decades of climate policies, a proper and independent Australian cost-benefit analysis has inexplicably not yet been undertaken. So many times in this chamber I listened to the urgent bleatings of the Labor and Greens members opposite, despite demanding more taxes and imposts to finance their financial agenda, based on adopting the Greens' fads, fashions and lunacy. The debate is now blown wide open, Mr Acting Deputy President, and I am not going to stop until everyday Australians are saved from these grotesque policies, pushed by beclowned academics grabbing taxpayer grants and pushing an international agenda destroying our nation's sovereignty. How is anyone in Australia to take them seriously when hopeless wastes of taxpayer money, such as these, provide evidence of their disregard for the long-suffering Queensland and Australian taxpayer? Senator Smith, I would wonder if Senator Smith wonders how many regional airports could have been built with this money. We in Pauline Hanson's One Nation party will work to ensure the freedom of speech, accountability through cost-benefit analysis, and we will protect people's cost of living.